I want to compare which is bigger out of 3/4 or 2/5, and we're going to use common denominators. Now to help me explain, I've got some diagrams here. So here I've got 3 hearts out of 4 shapes to represent 3/4. Here I've got 2 hearts out of 5 shapes to represent 2/5. Now you cannot compare these two groups as they are because they have different number of shapes in each group. Here I've got 4 shapes, here I've got 5 shapes. You can only compare which group has most hearts when it has the same number of shapes in both groups. So what you can do is you can start adding extra groups of shapes in as long as it's the same combination of shapes as what you've already got. So now I've got 8 shapes to 5. So maybe if I add another one of these in, it might be the same. 9, I've got 8 to 10. Let's add another one of these. Now I've got 12, 16 shapes, maybe another one of these. So I've got 16 to 15, it's close. Now I'm at 20, maybe another 4. Now I've got 20 shapes here and 20 shapes here, so I can compare. Let's just have a look at what I've got. So I started with 4, then 8, 12, 16 and 20, and here I started with 5, 10, 15 and 20 shapes, and we stopped once we got the same number. So having a look at what that means for equivalent fractions, I started with the fraction 3/4 and ended up with 15 hearts out of 20 shapes altogether. Here I started with 2/5 and ended up with 8 out of 20 shapes altogether. Now it's quite easy to see directly that this is clearly the bigger of the two fractions, and you can see in the diagram this has a lot more hearts than this set over here, which means 3/4 must be the biggest fraction. But how could we have worked that out without using all this diagram? So what I'm going to do is have a look at some of the multiples of 4 and 5. So I'm going to write out the multiples of 4 and 5. Remember, multiples are just your times tables. So the multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24 and so on. The multiples of 5 are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 and so on. Now these numbers should look familiar. Notice these numbers happen to be the numbers that the group went up by. 5, 10, 15, you'll see here as well, 5, 10, 15. We stopped once we hit a number that was the same in both, and this number is called the lowest common multiple. Sometimes you'll see it as LCM for lowest common multiple. So maybe there's a quick way of finding what this number might be without having to do all this work over here. Just notice what happens when I do 4 times 5. 4 times 5 happens to be the lowest common multiple. And if I take 4 and multiply it by 5, I get 20. And if I take 5 and multiply it by 4, I get 20. So maybe if I go to my fraction with 4 as my denominator and times it by 5, I might end up with my answer. So 4 times 5 is 20, but if we multiply the bottom by 5, I have to multiply the top. And just check, 3 times 5 happens to be 15. What if I go to my fraction with 5 as my denominator and times it by 4? 5 times 4 gives me 20, and 2 times 4 gives me 8. So a nice way to go straight to common denominators is to take one of the bottom numbers and multiply the other side by that number, take the other denominator and multiply the other side by that number, and you'll get straight to fractions with common denominators.